Hey guys, this is Anthony Morganti from OnlinePhotographyTraining.com. Welcome to my video series, Mastering Lightroom Classic CC. In this, our second last video in the Mastering Lightroom Classic CC video series, we're going to take a look at the print module. In the description below this video, I'm going to have a link to a video series that I did a short time ago where I go into great detail on how to print in Lightroom. In that video series, I talk about all the settings in the print module, and we're going to be talking about that in this video as well. But also in that series, I talk about how to prepare your printer to print, how to prepare your images to print, how to look for printer profiles, ICC profiles. So I go into more detail about all the other things beside Lightroom on printing an image. So I recommend that if you want to get serious about printing images, that you check out that video series as well. As I mentioned in this video, we're going to talk about the print module and what you need to know about it to print your image. And like the book and slideshow modules, I recommend that any images you want to print, you either put in a folder by themselves or create a collection that contains those images. So I have a collection to be printed and I have 4 images in it. So I'm going to say I want to print these 4 images. So I'm going to go over to the print module. And you can see as soon as we open the print module, whatever was the last paper used and the last layout used will pop up, and it will align your image that you happen to have highlighted in the film strip into that last used setup, as you can see here. Now, really, the first thing you need to do when you get into the print module is you need to tell Lightroom what type of printer you're using, or which printer you're using on your system, and what type of paper you're using. And to do that, we're going to go over to the left-hand column and click on Page Setup. And when you do, you can see it says Format 4. And right here, we'll have the printers that are on your system. Unfortunately, on the computer I'm using for this video, I really don't have a great photo printer on it. I do have a Canon color printer. I could use that. Of course, I don't want to use a black and white printer, scanner, fax. But I'm going to leave it on any printer for now, and you'll see why in a moment. Now, paper size. You could choose a lot of different standard size papers, A3, 4, and so on. Or you could do a custom size. So if you have a paper that's not a sized paper that's not shown here, you could go to Manage Custom Sizes. You could click this little plus sign. And when you do, this will become active, and you could type in the actual paper size. What is the printable area? User defined. Then that will be down here. So are you going to have margins? You would put the margin sizes here for your paper. Some printers can't print to the edge of the paper, although most printers nowadays can. So you may be able to get away without having any margins at all. You could print the entire image right on the paper. So that's how you would define your own size. But let's go with one of the pre-shown sizes here. We'll go with the US letter size, 8.5 by 11. That's a very common, of course, paper size. And there are photo papers that are that size as well. So we'll click OK. We're going to scale to 100% as well. We're not going to scale down our image or scale it up. So we have this 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. And you can see our image is kind of thrown on there, but it's showing 8 by 10 up here. And we'll talk about that in a second. So you have this paper now, and you have the printer you're going to use for this paper chosen. What do you want to put on the paper? First of all, you could put this single image like I have here, or you could go over to the template browser, and you could pick like a 4 by 5 contact sheet, or 5 by 8 contact sheet. In this case here, you would bring in your images that you want. You would have them all selected down here when you come in, and you would then add them to the contact sheet. Now, of course, I don't have this many images at here at all, but you get the idea of how that would work. So you could pick these different sizes of layouts here for your image. When you have ones you like, you could just then drag in the images you want. You could kind of move these around on the cell to make it better print on your paper. Whatever you need, you could do just as simple as that. But let's say we're not going to use a specific template. We just want to print one image. Or maybe we want to create our own template. What we're going to do is we're going to go over here to the right-hand side, and we could click on Picture Package. And you could see we have these two 5x7s here. Again, you could kind of move these around on the paper to put them where you want them to print on the paper. Or you could go to a custom package, and you could see it kind of defaulted to that custom package right there. Again, you could change this. You don't need to use these exact dimensions, these sizes, whatever. What you could do is just hit delete, click on one, hit delete, click on another one, hit delete. Now we cleared it. So we could come with this custom package. You go down here where it says cells, and we could add to the package. We're going to add, let's say, 2 by 2.5. We could add a bunch of those. And let's say we want to add a 1 5x7. Then we could come in here and we could move these all around so they print on the paper where we want them to print. Like that. So we could make out this custom size. But again, for this demonstration, let's just surmise or pretend that we're not actually going to print a bunch of different images. Of course, once you get this, then you could drag in the images and put them where you want them to print. And I only have 4, and we have 7 places. But that's very easy to do. Now you could just drag in the images. But again, let's just say that we're just going to do this single image. Now, we have the single image, and we have some choices for the image here. Image settings, zoom to fill. If you uncheck it, you can see now it's printing every pixel of the image. It's a uncropped image that was shot with a full frame, or it wasn't a full frame sensor, but it was a sensor that was 2x3 in a DSLR. So it's going to have the 2x3 dimensions, which would print perfectly to 8x12 paper, but we're using this 8.5x11 paper, so you can see we have these margins if you want to print every pixel. On the other hand, if we click on zoom to fill, it's going to zoom it to print most of it on the paper. You can see we have these margins, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it crops some of your image. This is one of the top questions I get about printing. People complain that they send their images to a lab, or they print them themselves, and they can't stop getting it cropped. They want to print the entire image. And part of the reason is you might have zoom to fill checked, so it's going to crop out some pixels. The other issue you might have are margins. You could see down here in layout we have margins, and we have a 1/4 inch margin on the left, right, and top, and then we have a 0.56 inch margin at the bottom. But when I try to move those down, they won't go down. They're kind of stuck on that size. But if I move them the other way, you can see I could scrunch down my image all different ways. But I can't get rid of these margins. I want these to read 0.0. And this is another question I get a lot. People complain they can't get their margins down to 0. Well, it has to do with your printer. As I mentioned, some printers can't print edge to edge. And if we go back to page setup, this kind of generic any printer format we used has margins. So what you need to do is actually make sure that your printer is listed in here. It should be listed when you installed it on your computer. And if your printer can print edge to edge, when it's installed in your system will know that it can print edge to edge. So we'll click the color printer and then click OK. Now when we go over to the margins, you'll see that we could bring these down all down to 0. Now this again is a ratio 2:3 image, so it would print an 8:12 perfect, but we're on 8.5:11 paper, so it won't. It still kind of gets some of it cropped, as you can see as I move it around. So I can move it to print exactly what I want printed, but you'll notice we still have these margins. That's because of the cell size down here. You can see the height is at 10 and the width is at 8. So it's actually printing an 8:10 on 8.5:11 paper, and that's what you see here, 8:10. Well, if I want to print more, we could bring that to 11 and that to 8.5. So we're printing edge to edge now. So kind of two things stopped us from printing edge to edge. We had this generic printer used, which won't allow you to print edge to edge, and also the margins we then had to bring down to 0, and then the actual cell size. Now, as I mentioned, what if you want to print every single pixel? Well, in that case, you're going to have to scrunch down your image with this width in this case, and just keep going till you're not losing any pixels, right around there. And you're going to have these borders on either side, and you're going to have to cut those borders when you're done. That way you could print your image without any cropping at all. So let's just say we want it cropped, so we're going to leave it at that. So that is kind of these first 3 or 4 tabs in the print module, because they all kind of work together in conjunction with your page setup so that you could get the layout the way you want it and get the actual pixels that you want printed represented on your paper here on your preview, so they do get printed. One other thing we'll talk about, this rotate to fit. Obviously it's just going to flip your image around, and we want it like that. Repeat one photo per page. You can click on that and it's just going to, only do one photo per page. Nothing out of the ordinary. Now the stroke border, if I go back to a picture package and we go to this photo border width, you can see that width there. Then we have this kind of inner stroke. You could get this like black edge around it. And then if we go back to our single image, the stroke border, and turn that on, you can see it's going to just put it's going to shrink your image down. You're not going to crop away any pixels, but it's going to put a border around your image. You might want to use that if you don't want to use a matte. When you frame your image, you could just print a border on it. So I think that's pretty much everything you need to know about this. The only other thing is if you want to keep your image square, you could click this box here, but there's no need to do that. So we're going to print this 8.5:11 image. It is going to crop out some pixels again, because it is a 2:3 ratioed picture. So the short size has 2 units and the long size has 3 units. So an 8:12 would be perfect because it's 2 units of 4 inches and 3 units of 4 inches. The common denominator is the 4 inches. So we have 8:12. That's why that would print perfectly on 8:12 paper, a 2:3 ratioed image. I get questions. The reason I'm going a little depth on this is I get a lot of questions on people don't understand the ratios of the sensor and how it relates to printing your paper or printing your images, and they don't understand really why they're getting their images cropped or they end up with borders. So really just do a little more research on Google. You could probably read it a lot better than I can explain it in this video. So we could come through and look at all our images and how they'll print. And you can move, again, because I am cropping a little bit, I could move these images around so that they print exactly the way I want them to print. Just like that. Now, guides. Do you want the guides to show? These up here, we have the rulers. We have page bleed. A lot of this you won't see. It will depend on the actual picture package you're using. So a lot of these guides might not show. Dimensions is right here, 7 by 5 at 821 pixels per inch. So we got all these different grids, the grid on the paper, the image cells right there. I don't know if you could see it in the video. So we have a lot of different guides. Those don't affect the print at all. It's just there to show you and to guide you on where to put your image perhaps, or where your image lays on the paper in relation to each other and that. So those are the guides. Do you want a background color? Again, this would be more applicable if you're not printing edge to edge. So if you have a picture package, you could print a background color, and you could pick like gray. You can see how it's printing. It's going to print this background color. Obviously, that again pertains to more so the packages, or when you're not printing edge to edge at the very least. Identity plate, we talked about this before in the book module and the slideshow module. You have identity plates. You can put in this case, your name. If you click this little triangle here, you could pick a different identity plate if you have one. You can barely see it there. You could click on it and resize it though. And it's, of course, not a color that is showing up. But, of course, usually you don't want to print an identity plate on with your image, or print a background color usually. But on your identity plate, when you do pick it, you could change the opacity, and then you could scale it with this slider if you do not want to use the handles. You could just use the slider. You could render it behind the image, so in this case it wouldn't show, or on every image. You can see it's printing right here. If you click on every image, it will be on every image. You might want an identity plate if you're sending out proofs and you don't want people to steal the proof. You could put proof copy or something like that on there, and then have it go on every single image. I'm not going to use identity plate. You can put your watermark on here. Just click. We covered watermarks in previous videos, how to create them. And, then in this case, I have this kind of lousy text watermark that you could use. If you don't want to use a watermark, keep that off. Cut guides to help you cut the paper. So we have these guides here to help you cut your prints. Now, this is probably one of the more important parts of the print module, the actual print job. We want to print it to what? A JPEG file or a printer? We're going to print it to a printer, obviously. Draft mode printing means nothing is going to... Lightroom's not going to tell the printer any special instructions on how to print the image. Not going to do any settings specific to the paper you're using, It's just going to print it very quickly so you can get an idea of what the layout looks like. I'm going to go back up to my single image contact sheet. So that's draft mode printing. If you want to really print an image that is a keeper, we're going to uncheck that box. Now, print resolution. You can notice up here that I have it 8.5 by 11 by 437 ppi. Again, if you're not seeing that, go up here and make sure that this dimensions is checked right here in the guides section. What you want to do is you don't want the ppi of the image to drop below 240. In that case, usually that will affect the quality of the print. And the bigger the print you have, the lower the ppi will go. And in this case here, I have more than enough. You can see 437 ppi, so I really don't have to worry about anything. You could force it to 240 by clicking this box. Now you can see it disappeared. It's going to be 240. If you're over, let it be over. If you're under, then click that box, and Lightroom will use algorithms to try to enlarge your image enough so that it will give you an acceptable print at 240 pixels per inch. Now, of course, I'm not going to get into it. I get questions all the time about pixels per inch and dots per inch. Pixel per inch are really your monitor, is a monitor term, the pixels on your monitor, and dots per inch are the printer. So just kind of, we use this as a guide, we don't really care about the pixels per inch per se. We just know that if we want it to be at least 240, anything below that, the print's not going to look good. So If you're over, with this unchecked, if you're over 240, don't worry about it. Now, sharpening. Often you'd like to sharpen the image a little bit because when the printer ink hits the paper, it tends to get absorbed and get softened a little bit, so it will soften your print. So we want to do some type of sharpening, low, standard, or high. Typically, I found standard works out fine for the printers I use and the paper I most often use. Media type, are you using glossy or matte paper? Because matte paper will absorb more ink than the glossy paper. So you're going to have to do the standard sharpening for matte paper is going to be a little more robust than the standard sharpening for glossy paper. So just pick that. 16-bit output. I've never really found a really good explanation on what that actually does or means. Typically, you almost always could have that checked. If it's active, check it. If it can't be checked, it's going to be inactive. So that's pretty much it. And usually it's going to be active for today's computers. So if that's inactive, there's nothing you could do about it anyway. Now, color management. This is where we get into, we're going to tell the printer how to handle this print job. You can have the printer take care of everything. Typically, you don't want to do that. You want to tell the printer what to do. You can see here, managed by printer. As soon as you click that, this all goes and gets dimmed out. So now whatever settings you have on your printer is going to control how this gets actually printed as far as the actual technical aspect of the way the ink is sprayed on the paper and the way the printer handles the paper. You prefer Lightroom to tell the printer how to handle it. So we're going to go up here and we have all these printer profiles. And you can see here's one I often use is on an Epson P600. I use exhibition fiber paper. Now, of course, I didn't pick my Epson printer over here because it's not on this computer that I'm using for this video. Remember when we did our print setup here, I just picked my Canon color printer because that's what I have on this system. What you could do is whatever paper you're using, there's a lot of different manufacturers of paper. Of course, there's Epson, and I think the big three are Epson, Canon, and HP. But there's all kinds of paper. Hahnemuhle is one of my favorites, and you can see that there's probably, there isn't any Hahnemuhle on here. Oh yeah, right here. Barita paper is one of my favorites, made by Hahnemuhle. And I have a profile for a Canon printer, and I have a profile for an Epson printer. And I could then pick either. Now you can see there's individual profiles for that paper, that specific Barita paper on those two different printers, because the printers spray the ink different from one another. So you have to tell the printer, this is how you're going to handle this paper. Where do you get these printer profiles from? Well, you can click Other, and when you installed your printer, it may have installed some papers along with the printer. And you can see when I installed the Epson P600, we have a lot of paper. But where do you get these other ones, these off-brands like Hahnemuhle? It's not going to be included. There's no Hahnemuhle printers. There's just Hahnemuhle paper. Well, you go to the website. And when you go to the Hahnemuhle's website, look for ICC profiles. They're called Printer ICC profiles. And you could go there, and they'll have a list of a bazillion different printers for the specific type of Hahnemuhle paper you want to use. And you pick the paper that you want to use, then you find the ICC profile for your printer for that paper. It's as simple as that. And then you install it into Lightroom. Very, very simple to do, which I cover in that video series where I go really in depth about how to print. But for this, let's say I'm going to use this Canon Pro with this Barita paper. Now, intent, perceptual or relative. This is how it interprets the colors. Again, I go into more detail. This kind of gets technical because sometimes the printer won't be able to render a specific color. It's just incapable of rendering that color. So how do you want it to fake the color? In a perceptual way or a relative way? In a relative way, it's going to look at the surrounding pixels and take something that is close that it could really use or print. Perceptual ways, it's going to go by the whole image, and it's a little more technical than that, but it's going to pick a color. Tell you the truth, you could print this once using perceptual and then print it a second time using relative, and you'd be hard pressed to see the difference. So just pick one. If you don't like how it looks, try the other one. Print adjustment. When we view our images on our monitor, if your monitor is not calibrated, chances are it's going to be either too bright or too dark, or have too much contrast or too little contrast compared to what it really is, meaning your monitor's not calibrated, it's not rendering the brightness and contrast properly. That's why, again, in that video series that I keep running, I talk, the very first episode, I show how to calibrate your monitor. If you print a print, and let's say it's too dark, then you don't have any calibration equipment to calibrate your monitor. Click on this print adjustment, and you want to turn brightness up. On the other hand, if your print is too bright, you want to turn brightness down. How much? Well, it's a guessing game. You just got to waste paper. So if your print came out too dark, you're going to turn brightness up. Turn it up to plus 31. Print. If it's still too dark, move it a little more to the right. If it's all of a sudden too bright, move it a little bit to the left. Keep playing around. If your image looks like it lacks contrast, you're going to have to turn contrast up. And again, it's going to be a guessing game. You don't know. That's why it's really best to calibrate your printer. And the calibration tools aren't that expensive. I mean, less than $200, you could get a decent one to calibrate your monitor. And I, again, demo it in that other video series. Now, when you're ready to rock and roll, just print. You could click print right here. Now, also, I should mention, there's a couple buttons I didn't mention here. Mac versions of Lightroom have print settings right here, and I don't think Windows versions have that. And over here on the right, we have printer on the Mac version. I believe Windows versions have this button. And you'll see that it's the same exact thing. You come up with this box. All that is your settings for your printer, specific settings, the media and quality, but we didn't check, or we're up here and we are not, we are handling the print job through Lightroom. We're not letting our printer handle it. So right here where it says profile, if you have managed by printer, then you need to click on one of those two buttons and come up here and manage your print through your printer. That's what that means. So those two buttons, if you're doing this the way I recommend, using the ICC profile for your specific paper and printer for color management, you have a calibrated monitor. You don't have to worry about that. Then you don't have to worry about either of those two buttons because it doesn't matter. Lightroom is going to tell the printer what to do. And then just click print and you're done. You printed your image. Now, if, let's say this is a big seller, I sell a bazillion of these Eagle prints and I want to save these settings, I could just create a saved print and I could give it a name. So I'm going to call it my Eagle there. It's just Eagle, let's say. And I'm going to save it inside to be printed. So it's going to be saved inside this collection. And just click create. And you can see there it is. Now that saved all these settings and the actual image. So you see the other three images disappeared. So if I sell out of these, I could just come in here, click on this. I don't have to go through all this rigmarole again. I could just do that and click print and I'm ready to roll. If you like the layout, now in this case it's only one image, it's no big deal, and the settings though, and you want to save that, but you don't want to save the image with it, then you would go over here to the template browser and you would click this plus sign here and you would call it, let's say in this case it's my single image. You know, I could put 8.5 by 11, but I won't. Just say, and we're going to save it to user templates and click create. So we have that here. So what that is now, if I want to print, let's say this, this gorilla, I then click on my single image, and what it will do is it will change all these settings over here to what they need to be to print this image the way I actually just printed the eagle, the exact same settings. So those are the two different saves you could do. Save everything, including the image, or just save the settings. And the settings are in the template, and in this case, the actual settings and image are down here in the collections. I think that's pretty much everything you need to know about the print module. But if you really want to get into it deeper, again, I'll link in the description below this video. The first video of that, it's a mini series. It's only 4 videos long of how to print in Lightroom. Thank you, everyone that watches my videos. I truly do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.